The boardroom went silent when the CEO's leg gave out. "I can't stand up. It hurts." The VP called for her removal, but the single dad in the back stood up slowly. Nobody knew his daughter had been secretly writing to the woman they wanted destroyed. What he did next stopped them all in their tracks. Not a sound, not a breath, just silence, and a pink envelope with unicorn stickers. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you are tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Gideon Hayes had been a single father for 3 years, ever since his wife left when their daughter Naomi was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis. Every morning, Naomi followed the same routine because Naomi needed stability in her life. He would wake her up at 6:15, help her with her leg braces on the bad days when her joints were swollen and painful, make breakfast that always consisted of toast with butter and scrambled eggs, and drive her to school by 7:45. Their life was simple and predictable, which was exactly what both of them needed after years of uncertainty and pain. That morning started like any other morning. Naomi came down the stairs slowly, holding onto the railing with both hands. She was wearing her favorite blue dress and white sneakers. Her backpack was on one shoulder, and in her hand she carried a pink envelope covered in unicorn stickers. Naomi loved unicorns more than anything else in the world. She put unicorn stickers on everything that mattered to her, which meant that this envelope was very important. She showed him the letter she had written to someone called TF. For the past 6 months, Naomi had been writing to this mysterious person through a hospital pen pal program at City General Hospital. The program had been created to connect patients who were dealing with chronic pain and illness. The idea was that people who understood suffering could help each other through difficult times. The identities were kept anonymous so that people could be completely honest without fear of judgment or embarrassment. Naomi had been matched with someone who signed all their letters as TF. Gideon never asked too many questions about this person because the letters made his daughter genuinely happy for the first time since her diagnosis. She would talk about how TF understood exactly what it felt like when your body hurt, and people stared at you like you were different. She said TF was lonely and needed a friend who understood what real pain felt like. Naomi took this responsibility very seriously. She wrote letters every single week, decorating them carefully with stickers and drawings, and filling them with encouragement and wisdom that seemed far beyond her 8 years. In her latest letter, Naomi had written about a new girl at school who had asked why she walked funny sometimes. Instead of being upset, Naomi had told this girl that she walked that way because her legs were learning to be brave. She told Gideon that TF had written back, saying that Naomi was the bravest person she had ever met. TF said she wished she could be as brave as an 8-year-old girl who faced pain every single day with a smile. Gideon dropped Naomi at school and drove to work at Freeman Technologies, where he had been employed for 3 years as a data analyst. Nobody at the company really knew him or cared about him. He sat in the back during meetings, did his work quietly and efficiently, and went home to his daughter at exactly 5:30 every evening. He had learned to be invisible after his life fell apart when his wife left, and his world became focused entirely on keeping Naomi safe and happy. Being invisible meant being safe. It meant avoiding attention and judgment. It meant protecting himself and his daughter from more pain. That afternoon, there was a major board meeting that the entire executive team had been preparing for weeks. Teresa Freeman, the CEO and founder of Freeman Technologies, was about to sign a billion-dollar merger deal with one of the largest tech companies in the country. The boardroom was filled with executives and board members, all of them wearing expensive suits and carrying themselves with the confidence that came from having power and money. Gideon sat in his usual spot at the back of the room, taking notes on his laptop that nobody would ever read or care about. Teresa Freeman was known throughout the industry as the Steel CEO. She was tough, cold, demanding, and never showed even a hint of weakness or vulnerability. She had built Freeman Technologies from absolutely nothing into one of the most successful and innovative tech companies in the country. People respected her abilities and accomplishments, but they also feared her intensity and perfectionism. She demanded absolute perfection from everyone around her and had no patience whatsoever for excuses or failure. The presentation went smoothly for the first hour. Teresa stood at the head of the long conference table, explaining the intricate details of the merger with complete confidence and authority. Her voice was strong and clear. Her posture was perfect. She commanded the room with the ease of someone who has spent decades making powerful men listen to her. But Gideon, sitting in the back and watching carefully, noticed small things that everyone else seemed to miss. He saw her grip the edge of the table just a little too hard, her knuckles turning white from the pressure. He saw her shift her weight from one leg to the other every few minutes, as if she could not quite find a comfortable position. He saw brief flashes of pain cross her face before she quickly hid them behind her professional mask. When it was finally time to sign the merger documents, Teresa stood up from her chair to walk to the end of the table where the papers were waiting. That was the moment when everything changed in an instant. Her leg buckled underneath her without warning. She grabbed desperately at the edge of the table to stop herself from falling completely, but her body refused to cooperate with her will. She fell back into her chair heavily, her face suddenly pale and covered in sweat. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. The room went completely silent in a way that felt suffocating and terrible. Everyone in that boardroom stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to concern to something that looked uncomfortably like satisfaction. Teresa tried to stand up again, using her arms to push herself out of the chair, but her legs simply would not support her weight. Her hands were shaking. Her professional mask had completely crumbled, revealing genuine fear underneath. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was nothing like the strong and commanding voice they had all heard moments before. It was weak and frightened and small. She said that she could not stand up. She said that it hurt. Those simple words hung in the air like an accusation. The silence in the room became even heavier and more uncomfortable than before. Some board members looked away from her, as if witnessing her weakness was somehow embarrassing for them. Others whispered to each other behind their hands, already beginning to gossip and speculate about what this meant. David Brown, who served as vice president of the company, leaned forward in his chair with an expression that Gideon recognized immediately. It was the expression of someone who had just spotted a weakness in an enemy and was preparing to attack. But Gideon was not paying attention to David Brown or the whispering board members. His entire focus was on Teresa, and specifically on what her hand was doing. Her hand had moved quickly to her jacket pocket, as if she was reaching for something that could provide comfort or strength. She pulled something out slightly, just enough for Gideon to see what was from his position at the back of the room. A pink envelope, with unicorn stickers all over it. Gideon's heart stopped beating for a moment. He knew those unicorn stickers. He had watched his daughter carefully place them on an envelope that very morning while she ate her breakfast. He knew that handwriting on the envelope. He knew to whom that letter was addressed. TF Teresa Freeman. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman his daughter had been writing to for 6 months. The person Naomi talked about constantly with such concern and affection, the lonely soul who had been sharing their pain and struggles through anonymous letters, was sitting right there at the head of the table. The Steel CEO, whom everyone feared and respected, was the same person who had been pouring her heart out to an 8-year-old girl through pink envelopes with unicorn stickers. Gideon's mind raced as he put all the pieces together. 6 months ago, Teresa must have been going to City General Hospital for treatment. She must have been dealing with some kind of serious medical condition that caused terrible pain. She must have signed up for the Pen Pal program, probably thinking she would help some sick child feel better about their situation. Instead, that sick child had been helping her, giving her strength and courage through simple words of encouragement and understanding. Nobody else in that boardroom knew any of this. They had no idea that Teresa had been fighting a private battle for months or possibly years. They just saw a powerful woman who had suddenly become weak and vulnerable. They saw someone who could no longer maintain the image of perfection that she had worked so hard to create. They saw a liability that needed to be removed before it damaged the company and their own interests. The hospital pen pal program had been designed to help people by keeping their identities completely anonymous. Teresa had never known that the little girl writing to her was the daughter of one of her own employees. Naomi had never known that the person she was trying to encourage was one of the most powerful business leaders in the city. And Gideon had never imagined that his daughter's acts of kindness were reaching someone who desperately needed them in ways he could not have predicted. David Brown did not waste a single second after Teresa's collapse. He had been vice president of Freeman Technologies for 5 years, and during all that time, he had been working directly under Teresa's shadow. He was intelligent, ambitious, calculating, and extremely skilled at corporate politics. He had been patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity to make his move and take control of the company. This sudden moment of weakness was exactly what he had been waiting for. David stood up from his seat and addressed the room with a voice that attempted to sound concerned and reasonable, though anyone paying close attention could hear the excitement underneath. He began by saying that while everyone certainly hoped Teresa would make a full and quick recovery, they also had serious responsibilities to consider. He talked about the company's obligations to shareholders who had invested billions of dollars based on trust and confidence. He emphasized that the business world demanded stability and strength, especially during a major merger that would determine the company's future for decades to come. He used carefully chosen words and phrases like fiduciary responsibility, risk management, and due diligence to make his power grab sound like the rational and responsible thing to do. He suggested that a CEO who could not even stand up to sign documents could not possibly lead a billion-dollar company through complex negotiations and challenging market conditions. He painted a picture of disaster and failure if they allowed someone in Teresa's condition to remain in charge. The other board members began nodding their heads in agreement. They whispered to each other and looked at Teresa with expressions that mixed pity with judgment and discomfort. These were all powerful and wealthy people who had built their entire lives and identities around appearing strong and successful and in control. Weakness made them profoundly uncomfortable because it reminded them of their own vulnerabilities. Weakness made them cruel because cruelty was easier than compassion. David called for an immediate emergency vote to temporarily remove Teresa from her position as CEO of the company she had built from nothing. He suggested that he should take over as interim CEO until Teresa recovered her health, if she ever did recover fully. He made it all sound like he was doing everyone a tremendous favor. He made it sound like the only responsible and rational choice available to them. Teresa sat motionless in her chair, still holding Naomi's letter tightly in her pocket, like it was the only real thing in the room. She looked small and defeated, and nothing like the powerful leader who had commanded that same room just minutes earlier. The woman who had intimidated rooms full of powerful men for decades now looked like she might break down and cry at any moment. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, to explain, but no words came out. How could she possibly explain to these people what she had been going through? How could she make them understand that she had been scheduling physical therapy sessions at 5 o'clock in the morning so that nobody from the company would see her? How could she tell them that she had been working 14 and 16-hour days while her body screamed in constant pain because she knew that showing even the smallest sign of weakness would be used against her? How could she explain that she had sacrificed her health and her personal life and everything else to build this company into what it was today? She could not explain any of it because she knew they would not care. These people did not value sacrifice or courage or determination. They valued appearances and profits, and protecting their own interests. So she sat there in defeated silence while the people around her casually discussed removing her from the company that represented her entire life's work. Gideon watched all of this happen from his invisible position at the back of the room. He thought about his daughter and the conversations they had every morning during breakfast. He thought about how Naomi always talked about TF with such genuine concern and affection. He remembered how Naomi had told him just last week that TF had written about feeling completely alone and scared. He remembered how Naomi had said that TF needed someone to stand up for her because she had been standing alone for far too long and was getting tired. Naomi had been only 8 years old when she said those words. She had understood something profound that all these supposedly brilliant and educated adults in their expensive suits completely fail to understand. She had understood that real strength was not about falling down or never showing weakness. Real strength was about getting back up every single time you fell. And sometimes real strength meant having the courage to let someone help you when you could not get back up on your own. Gideon had made a promise to his daughter. Every single morning when he dropped her off at school, Naomi would ask him to look out for people who needed help during his day. She would say that maybe he would meet someone who needed a friend just like TF needed her letters and encouragement. Gideon had always agreed and said yes, thinking it was just a sweet and innocent thing his daughter said to make herself feel better about the world. He had never actually imagined that he would be put in a position where he had to keep that promise in such a dramatic and public way. But the moment was here, right now in front of him. The woman, his daughter, had been trying desperately to save herself from a distance, was about to be destroyed by people who valued power more than humanity. They were going to take everything from her simply because she had shown a moment of genuine human vulnerability. These people had probably never fought for anything real or meaningful in their entire comfortable lives. And now they were going to punish someone for fighting battles they could not even imagine. Gideon had spent 3 long years making himself invisible in this company and in his life. He had learned to stay quiet and keep his head down and never draw attention to himself. He had learned that speaking up and standing out only brought more pain and judgment. He had built walls around himself and his daughter to keep them safe from a world that had already hurt them so much. But sitting there in that moment, watching David Brown prepare to call for a vote that would destroy Teresa, Gideon realized that staying invisible was no longer an option for him. His daughter had been fighting for Teresa through her letters and her kindness and her wisdom. Now it was his turn to fight for her in person. Now it was his turn to keep the promise he had made to an 8-year-old girl who believed that her father was someone who helped people who needed help. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay hidden. Now let's continue. Gideon stood up slowly and deliberately from his chair at the back of the room. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor made several people turn around to look at him with confusion and annoyance. They looked at him like he was an insect that had somehow found his way into an important meeting. Who was this person? Why was he standing up and interrupting? This was a board meeting for executives and important decision makers. He was just a data analyst, someone whose job was to sit quietly and take notes that nobody would ever read. He had absolutely no right to be part of this conversation or to have any opinion about what was happening. David Brown stopped talking mid-sentence and stared at Gideon with obvious irritation written across his face. He was about to say something sharp and dismissive to put this nobody back in his place, when he actually looked at Gideon's face and saw something there that made him pause. It was not the face of someone who could be easily dismissed or intimidated or sent away. It was the face of someone who had made a final decision and could not be stopped by anything. Gideon began walking from the back of the room toward the front, where Teresa sat and where David Brown stood. His footsteps echoed loudly in the silence of that boardroom. Every single person in that room turned to watch him walk. Some looked annoyed. Some looked curious. Some looked nervous because they could sense that something significant was about to happen, even if they did not understand what was yet. Teresa looked up from her chair with confusion and fear in her eyes, probably thinking that this was just another person coming forward to make her situation even worse than it already was. She had no idea who Gideon was or why he was walking toward her or what he was about to do. When Gideon finally reached the front of the room, he turned around to face all the board members sitting at the long conference table. He looked at each of them individually, these powerful and wealthy people in their expensive suits with their important titles and their comfortable lives. He looked at them, and he saw them clearly for exactly what they really were underneath all their polish and sophistication. They were cowards. They were bullies. They were people who had never actually had a fight for anything real or meaningful in their entire lives. They had inherited their positions or bought their way into them or climbed over other people to get them, but they had never truly suffered or struggled or had to show real courage. Gideon spoke in a voice that was calm and steady and completely unafraid. He told them that his name was Gideon Hayes and that he had been working at Freeman Technologies for 3 years in the data analysis department. He told them that they probably did not know who he was because he was not important enough or high-ranking enough for them to notice or care about. He told them that he had an 8-year-old daughter named Naomi who had been diagnosed with juvenile arthritis when she was 5 years old. He told them that his daughter had been participating in a hospital pen pal program at City General Hospital for the past 6 months. The room remained completely silent. Nobody interrupted him or told him to stop talking. They could all sense that something important was happening, even though they did not yet understand what it was or where it was going. They sat there and listened despite themselves. Gideon continued speaking. He explained that his daughter had been matched through the hospital program with someone who signed all their letters with the initials TF. He explained that Naomi had been writing to this person every single week for 6 months, sending letters that were always covered in unicorn stickers because that was how his daughter marked things that were important to her. He explained that TF had been writing back to Naomi, sharing thoughts and feelings about what it was like to fight battles alone, to be in constant pain, to be terrified that people would see you as weak or broken if they knew the truth about what you were dealing with. Then Gideon looked directly at Teresa Freeman, sitting in her chair at the head of the table. He told the entire room that he had just realized, in the past few minutes while watching this meeting unfold, that TF was Teresa Freeman. His 8-year-old daughter had been writing letters of encouragement and support to their CEO for 6 months, and neither he nor Teresa nor Naomi had known about this connection until this very moment. The board members looked absolutely shocked. Several of them sat up straighter in their chairs. David Brown's face turned red with anger and frustration because he could clearly sense that his carefully planned power grab was falling apart right in front of him. Teresa stared at Gideon with tears beginning to form in her eyes, probably terrified that he was about to make everything worse by exposing all her vulnerabilities and weaknesses to everyone in that room. But Gideon did not make things worse for Teresa. Instead, he made everything crystal clear for everyone else in that room. He told the board members about everything he had learned from reading between the lines of his daughter's stories about TF over the past 6 months. He told them that Teresa had not been taking leg day at some expensive private gym like people in the office had always assumed when they gossiped about her schedule. She had actually been going to physical therapy sessions at City General Hospital. She had been scheduling those sessions at 5 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, so that nobody from the company would ever see her there. She had been fighting a degenerative spinal condition that caused severe and constant pain in her legs and back. She had been dealing with all of this in complete secrecy, while simultaneously working 14 and 16-hour days, and building their company into the billion-dollar success that it was today. Gideon's voice grew even stronger and more forceful as he continued speaking. He told them that his 8-year-old daughter, a child who had to wear leg braces and use railings to go downstairs, had understood something profound that none of these supposedly brilliant adults had managed to understand. She had understood that real strength was not about pretending to be perfect or never showing any weakness. Real strength was about continuing to fight even when your own body betrayed you every single day. Real strength was about showing up and doing your work and leading your company even when everything hurt and you wanted nothing more than to give up. Real strength was about refusing to quit, even when quitting would have been so much easier than continuing. Then Gideon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a photocopy of one of Naomi's recent letters to TF Teresa, had sent it to him several weeks ago through the hospital program's family sharing system. The program sometimes shared letters with family members to help them better understand what their children were experiencing and thinking about. Gideon had received this copy of his daughter's letter without having any idea at the time that it had been sent to Teresa Freeman. Gideon carefully unfolded the paper and began reading the letter out loud to the entire room. Naomi had written about a difficult day at school when some kids had laughed at her because she could not run fast during gym class. She had written about how she had gone home that afternoon and cried in her room because she felt different and broken and like she did not fit in with the other children. But then the letter shifted to something else entirely. Naomi had written that later that evening. She had remembered something important that TF had told her in a previous letter. She had remembered that being strong did not mean you never fell down or never struggled. Being strong meant getting back up every single day, even when your legs did not want to hold you anymore, and even when everything hurt, and even when you felt completely alone. The final lines of the letter, which Gideon read slowly and clearly so that everyone in that room could hear and understand, said this: TF, you told me in your last letter that you want to quit sometimes. You said you are tired of fighting alone. Please don't quit. I need you to keep being brave so that I can learn how to be brave too. We can be brave together even if we never meet. When Gideon finished reading those words, the boardroom remained in complete silence, but it was an entirely different kind of silence than before. It was not the silence of judgment or cruelty or people calculating their next political move. It was the silence of shame. It was the silence of people who had just been forced to look in a mirror and see themselves clearly for the first time. It was the silence of people who had just realized they were about to do something truly terrible to someone who actually deserved so much better from them. One by one, slowly and without anyone saying a word, the board members reached for the documents in front of them. One by one, they quietly signed the paper supporting Teresa's continued leadership of the company. They did not do it because they had suddenly developed admiration or respect for her. They did not do it because they had learned some valuable lesson about compassion or humanity. They did it because Gideon had held up a mirror and forced them to see what they actually were. They were people who had almost destroyed someone simply for having the courage to keep fighting when they themselves had never truly fought for anything real or meaningful in their comfortable lives. David Brown tried to protest. He tried to argue. He tried to regain control of the situation. But nobody in that room was listening to him anymore. His moment of opportunity had passed. The attempted coup had failed. And it had failed not because of corporate politics or power moves or clever maneuvering, but because a single father had stood up and kept a simple promise he had made to his 8-year-old daughter. After the meeting finally ended, the board members left the room as quickly as they possibly could. They did not look at Teresa or at Gideon as they gathered their belongings and hurried toward the door. They just wanted to escape from that boardroom and forget about what almost happened and what they had almost done. David Brown was the very first person to leave, and he slammed the heavy door behind him with barely controlled rage and humiliation. Teresa remained sitting in her chair at the head of the table, still clutching Naomi's pink envelope with the unicorn stickers. She looked up at Gideon with an expression that he found difficult to read or interpret. It seemed to be a complicated mixture of gratitude and disbelief, and something else that looked very much like relief. Gideon walked slowly over to where Teresa sat. He stood beside her chair and held out his hand to her. Without saying anything, Teresa looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, as if she could not quite believe what was happening or that someone was actually offering to help her. Then she reached up and took his hand, and Gideon helped her stand up slowly and carefully from her chair. Her legs were shaking visibly, and she was clearly in significant pain, but she managed to stay upright with his support and steadying presence beside her. They walked out of the boardroom together, moving very slowly and carefully through the hallways of Freeman Technologies. Employees who were still working late stared at them openly as they passed. The news about what had happened in the boardroom was already spreading rapidly through the building. People whispered to each other and pointed at Teresa and Gideon as they made their slow progress toward the elevator. The Steel CEO had collapsed during the most important meeting of the year. Some random analyst had stood up and said something that changed everything. The entire company was talking about it and would continue talking about it for weeks and months to come. Gideon ignored all the staring and whispering completely. His entire focus was on helping Teresa get safely outside of the parking lot where his truck was waiting. They took the elevator down to the ground floor in silence. Neither of them spoke because there were too many things to say, and no words seemed adequate for what had just happened between them. When they finally reached the parking lot, Teresa started to cry. These were not tears of pain this time. There were tears of overwhelming relief that came from finally being truly seen by another person after years of hiding. For years, Teresa had carried an enormous burden completely alone. For years, she had pretended to be stronger and more invincible than any human being could actually be. For years, she had believed with absolute certainty that showing even the smallest bit of weakness or vulnerability would destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. And then in one single afternoon, a stranger had proven her wrong about all of it. Gideon helped Teresa climb up into the passenger seat of his old pickup truck. It was nothing like the luxury cars that she usually rode in when she traveled for business. The seats were worn and the paint was faded, and there was a car seat in the back for Naomi. But Teresa did not seem to care at all about any of that. She just sat there with her hands folded in her lap, staring down at the pink envelope with unicorn stickers that had somehow connected her life to the life of a little girl she had never met in person. After a long moment of silence, Teresa finally spoke. Her voice was quiet and broken in a way that Gideon suspected very few people had ever heard. She asked if Naomi was really and truly his daughter. Gideon said yes, she was. Teresa started crying even harder when he confirmed it. She told him that Naomi had literally saved her life over the past 6 months. She said that every single morning when she woke up and did not want to get out of bed because the pain was too overwhelming, she would pull out one of Naomi's letters and read it. She said that a child she had never actually met face to face had given her the strength and courage to keep fighting when absolutely everyone else in her life expected her to be invincible and perfect at all times. Gideon felt his own eyes filling with tears as he listened to Teresa speak. He told her that Naomi talked about TF absolutely every single day without fail. He told her that his daughter had been genuinely worried about this lonely person who seemed to need a friend so desperately. He told her that Naomi had been calling TF her secret hero, someone who was fighting invisible battles that nobody else could see or understand or appreciate. Teresa laughed through her tears at that description. She said she was definitely not any kind of hero at all. She was just someone who was tired and scared and in constant pain and barely holding everything together. Gideon shook his head firmly at her words. He told her that being tired and scared and in pain was exactly what made her a hero. Real heroes were not people who never struggled or suffered. Real heroes were people who struggled every single day and somehow found the strength to keep going anyway. They sat together in the truck for quite a while, two strangers who had been connected most unexpectedly by a little girl with arthritis and a deep love for unicorn stickers. They had been saving each other's lives without having any idea they were doing it. Naomi's letters and encouragement had kept Teresa alive and fighting. Teresa's responses had helped Naomi understand that she was not alone in her struggles. And now Gideon had stepped into that circle of mutual support, completing something that all three of them needed desperately, even though they had not known it. Teresa asked if she could meet Naomi in person someday. Gideon smiled for the first time since the meeting and said that he thought Naomi would like that very much indeed. In fact, he told Teresa he was supposed to pick his daughter up from school in about 30 minutes. Teresa's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like hope. She asked very quietly if she could come with him to the school. Gideon said yes without any hesitation. They drove to Naomi's elementary school together in comfortable silence. When they arrived, Gideon parked his truck in the same spot where he parked every single afternoon. At exactly 3:15, the school doors opened and children began pouring out onto the playground and into the parking lot. Naomi came out slowly and carefully, using the metal railing to help herself down the concrete steps. When Naomi looked up and saw her father's familiar truck waiting in its usual spot. Her entire face lit up with happiness, and she waved enthusiastically at him. She began walking over slowly and carefully, being mindful of her balance and her leg braces. That was when Naomi noticed that there was someone else sitting in the passenger seat of her father's truck. Naomi stopped walking completely. She stood there in the middle of the parking lot and stared at Teresa Freeman with wide eyes full of recognition, even though they had never actually met before. There was something in that moment, some kind of invisible understanding that passed between them. Teresa opened the truck door slowly and stepped out carefully, using the door frame to support herself as she stood up. The two of them stood there in the afternoon sunlight, looking at each other, an 8-year-old girl wearing leg braces and a powerful CEO hiding a painful illness. Two people who had been fighting similar battles in complete isolation until they had found each other through pink envelopes covered in unicorn stickers. Naomi asked the same question that she asked her father every single day after school without fail. She asked if he had helped anyone today. Gideon looked at Teresa for a long moment, then back at his daughter. He told Naomi that he had met her friend TF today at work. Naomi's entire face lit up with pure joy mixed with concern. She asked if TF was okay now. Teresa knelt very slowly on the pavement, completely ignoring the pain that shot through her legs and spine until she was at the same eye level as Naomi. She looked directly into the eyes of this little girl, who had been her lifeline for 6 months. Teresa told Naomi that yes, she was okay now. She was okay because a very brave little girl had taught her what real strength actually looked like. She was okay because someone had finally stood up for her when she could not stand up for herself anymore. She was okay because she had finally learned that she did not have to fight her battles completely alone. Naomi smiled her bright, innocent smile and asked if they could be real friends now in person, not just through letters. Teresa said yes. She would like that more than almost anything. Then Naomi did something that surprised both of the adults standing there in the school parking lot. She reached out her small arms and hugged Teresa tightly, whispering that she was very proud of her for being brave today. Teresa held on to that little girl and cried openly. Gideon stood there watching this moment unfold, keeping one hand on his daughter's shoulder, and he realized something profound. Sometimes the most important promises in life are the ones made to children. Sometimes keeping those simple promises could change absolutely everything. Sometimes a pink envelope covered in unicorn stickers could end up saving more than just one life. The three of them stood there together in the school parking lot, while other parents and children walked past them on their way to cars and buses. Nobody else knew what had actually happened that day. Nobody knew that a CEO had almost lost everything she had built. Nobody knew that a single father had stood up to powerful people. Nobody knew that an 8-year-old girl had been the real hero of this entire story all along. But the three of them knew the truth, and that was enough. This story teaches us that the most meaningful acts of kindness often create ripples we cannot see. Naomi's simple letters, written without any expectation of recognition, became a lifeline for someone fighting battles in complete isolation. It reminds us that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the courage to continue despite it, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is allow others to help us when we can no longer stand alone. The story also reveals how children often possess wisdom that adults have forgotten, that vulnerability is not weakness, that everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about, and that standing up for someone when they cannot stand for themselves is one of the most powerful forms of love. In a world that rewards appearance over substance and punishes any sign of imperfection, true courage lies in being honest about our struggles and protecting those who are brave enough to do the same. The pink envelope with unicorn stickers symbolizes how small, consistent acts of compassion, no matter how insignificant they seem, can literally save lives and transform entire worlds. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. And here's what I need to know. Do you want part 2?